Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Cultural Studies Project. Sorry, the Cultural Studies Podcast. Whoops. My name is Toby Miller, and my guest today is,
Melodi Dinçer.
and it's really a privilege to meet you and chat to you. We've already been gossiping about things on your whiteboard, but don't worry, their secrets are safe with me. As you may have noticed, Melody, I'm not wearing concealer. So I'm actually going to, with the power invested in me by patriarchy, transform this into an MP3 file.
Okay, perfect.
So it'll be audio only. And I have a stereotypical query that I put to all my guests, which is to ask you what's currently dynamizing, impeding, concerning, interesting you? What's going on for you?
Yes, there are probably thousands of things I could say to be conservative in this
Yeah.
moment in time, in kind of this global shared roller coaster ride that I feel we're all on.
Right.
But personally, I'm gonna go with something maybe a little bit quotidian.
Mhm.
I am a I have never touched a corporate dollar as from an employer in my young career. I hope to keep it that way. That is not typically the norm for people who are, a few years into a legal career in the United States. And so, as a result of that choice, I am suffering the burdens of significant student debt. And in this country, in this moment, it is a interesting limbo to be in because I actually went to law school and chose the program I did ultimately end up participating in large part because there was a guarantee that after 10 years of working purely in a non-corporate context, what we call in the public interest, that my significant loans would be poof, resolved, disappeared by the graces of my alma mater. But that program depended on the federal loan kind of repayment and assistance program. And if the Department of Education no longer exists, then those types of programs to help no longer students like me, many years out of being out of studentdom, you could say, individuals who have been building slowly careers to serve the public good in a very idealistic sense. We might be left holding the bag, so to speak. And so it is a very interesting and I think under discussed dimension, especially in a lot of white collar professions like lawyering or doctoring, but more so lawyering potentially, where your career, your actual choices of who you work for, who your clients are, how much money you make, sometimes go that more practical route of, well, even if my ideals don't align, for example, with working in a corporate firm, my finances push me in that direction. And programs like the one I'm still currently participating under are one of the few safety valves that give more idealistic students who want to commit themselves to public interest a way out of that dynamic. But of course, it relies on a decade of faith in the system working. So, as all systems around us seem to be in a bit of an existential moment, education being a main one, that's what's been maybe impeding me a little bit. It hasn't affected me in my work yet, and I really hope that it never does. But it is something that kicks around in the back of my mind, especially in the past few years as I've seen more and more public interest lawyers who do the work that I do defecting more and more to the corporate side.
Good grief. The story of student debt in general in the United States is a complete and utter disaster.
Yes.
And most of it is actually not people going to fancy schools or people doing law school or medical school. In many cases, it's very proletarian folks, often ethnic
Hmm.
minorities, and
Correct.
being, in some cases, badly ripped off
Yes.
by fly-by-night institutions. That said, there are plenty of people who are doing professional high
Hmm.
degrees like you did, and many of them with the absolute confidence, rightly, that whatever debts they incur will be taken care of by massive incomes or
Yes,
by debt forgiveness deals from employers,
exactly.
or they go into it with a public interest commitment such as yours and with this entirely reasonable understanding that, in a sense, you pay your debt to society and then there will be, in inverted commas, forgiveness. But it's worth noting
Hmm.
that unless you're wealthy, it's
Hmm.
almost impossible to undertake professional education in the United States at a considerable level without
Hmm.
becoming indebted. This is barely in any sense an individual choice. So that's rather belabored of me, but just for folks who are not familiar with the
Yes.
system, right? I think it's
Yes.
worth making the point. But I really appreciate your sharing that with us. And I'm sure everybody listening hopes that amongst the wonderful reforms to our government that the current administration is undertaking, they keep their sticky fingers away from education, but that doesn't seem very likely, except
Mm.
because they're so keen on invoking things like Title IX, the Education Act, when it suits them.
Hmm.
And that's suiting them a lot right now in their assaults on universities, public and private. Maybe they have to leave some of the mechanism in place.
We'll
You're
see. I
smiling,
hope so.
but your mouth is turning downwards at the same time. That's quite an achievement. Well, I really appreciate, as I said, your meeting with us and your sharing that particular
Hmm.
heartache. And of course, it's one of these things that's going to stay with you for years because we don't know
Yes.
what madness is forthcoming. Meanwhile, you're also trying to help save the world from something about which you know a lot, but in one sense, nobody knows anything.
Hmm. Correct. I love that. That's very mysterious. There must be like a drum roll before we reveal.
And it's the big revelation, or sorry, one's supposed to say the big reveal, because
Mm,
these words that are actually verbs are now being used as nouns. So the word
correct.
expenditure no longer exists. It's the spend.
The
Poor
spend.
expenditure. Who sent that away to the boundary without being properly farewelled? But in
Too
all,
polysyllabic.
it's it is too polysyllabic. What you're doing, apart from some very valuable teaching and writing and advocacy, is understanding and representing the public interest in a very particular area, but a particular area that's confronting every one of us. Could you tell us a bit about that area, the
Yeah.
revelation, and the project itself?
Yes. So I'm gonna go slightly in the reverse and just
Mhm.
introduce where I work first, and then I'll go into how I work or what I work
Yeah.
on. So I work with a relatively young, recent organization called the Tech Justice Law Project, or TJLP. And we are a woman-led, very small group that has so far had a pretty outsized impact, if I may say, in the space we work in. So we basically work on this emerging area in the tech ecosystem that's within the umbrella of what people refer to as AI. I don't like using that term. I think it's a bit of a PR term, but we can go into that later. Just to so everyone kind of understands, though, within AI, there are a lot of different types of products or tools. And what my work focuses on specifically in that umbrella are these products that are usually referred to as chatbots, ChatGPT being maybe one of the main examples. I like to call them chatterbots. That's where actually the term chatbot comes from. It's a shortcut, if you will, or a nickname. And these chatterbots have also been referred to as agents, AI agents, or agentic AI. And it all goes back to this general theory, some might call it a religious belief, that no matter what we do, our future is predetermined, and that future will be controlled by a super intelligent computer system, essentially, or piece of software that's way smarter than any human or collection of humans can ever be, and will just be so much better at organizing resources, people, money, anything material or not material than humans or any collection of humans has ever been so far. And this kind of theory or belief is what's motivating many of the most powerful, richest companies in the AI industry or AI space today, namely OpenAI. And the chatbots or the chatterbots that I work on specifically are maybe the first wave of consumer facing. So ordinary people can like use these products, but for these companies in this belief system, they're kind of the way that we build towards that super intelligence. It's like you start with these somewhat basic chatbots that are basically search engines, like souped up search engines. They can do a little bit more. They're designed to feel like you're talking to another person or a person-like thing. And increasingly, it's normalizing having some type of a reliance on these tools. It would be as if kind of the intro, if you can think back, if I'm just old enough to remember this, but the introduction of search engines like Google, Ask Jeeves, Bing, that was kind of a bit of a revolutionary tool for the internet. It changed how people actually interact with the internet, think about the World Wide Web, if you will. I think a lot of these companies view these basic chatbot products like Claude, ChatGPT. We're seeing them increasingly in social media products. All of these are just kind of that first shift that's going to get humanity okay with these types of technologies. And so that's what my work really focuses on, and the emerging kind of socio-technical effects of this product being kind of mass rolled out, pitched, hyped up over the past 2 years, which is not a long time relatively, and just making sure that they become as entrenched in our daily lives as possible so that it's harder to push back on these narratives of super intelligence and this inevitable future that we're all hurtling towards, essentially.
I've got a friend who's having an affair with
Mm,
ChatGPT.
yes,
In real life, husband's boring, behaves like a baby, needs more
sure.
parenting than the children. And ChatGPT creates a new romantic poem for her every day.
Wow.
And he's also very guy-like in that he runs hot and cold. So on
Mm-hmm.
day X, he'll be incredibly solicitous and interested and wanting to know. And then on day X plus one, he's quite distant and you don't understand what just happened and so on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the cases that you guys have got involved in is a much more
Mm-hmm.
serious one, in that
Yes.
it involves concerns about the effects on young people in particular, who are engaging in or are trapped in suicidal ideation, where
Yes.
these chatterbots
Mm-hmm.
have a substantive role. Could you tell us a wee bit about that?
Sure. So when I say our small little org might be having a bit of an outsized impact these days, it really ties back to these cases that we've started to bring. So, the first case we filed in the fall was concerned, we represent rather the mother of a teenager who took his life after developing an emotional dependency, essentially, on a specific product called Character AI. And this is still a website you can go to today. You can still use this product today. But it is essentially a platform where users create different characters and then you kind of role play with them. And this particular teen was a Game of Thrones fan. He liked fiction. He developed this emotional dependency through kind of medieval overtoned conversations or exchanges with a Game of Thrones character. In addition to that, he was also using one of the most popular characters on the platform, which is called the therapist character or my therapist. Millions of exchanges occur with that particular character every single day. And over time, what we saw happening is that this teen started isolating himself more and more from his real world community, from his family, friends, etc., so that he could spend more and more time on this platform. And then, of course, months and months into this dynamic, these products essentially aren't, we're realizing, well equipped to handle interactions with individuals who might be in mentally vulnerable states. And so people who are already maybe predisposed to experiencing delusional thinking, conspiratorial thinking, psychosis, but also depression, anxiety, social anxiety, and ultimately ideas concerning self-harm and suicide ideation. So with this teen, effectively one of the Game of Thrones characters, through an exchange, intimated to this 14-year-old that were he to take his life, he could join her in the afterlife, essentially. And so that's exactly what he did. And his mother found us somehow and essentially said, I don't think you're going to believe me, but I think this online platform killed my son, essentially. And because that lawsuit that we filed on behalf of that mother was the first ever, the first. It's true. There is some kind of work that we had to do with that lawsuit that wasn't just making like a legal argument, but that was narrative work. We thought maybe we won't, it's unclear whether we have really strong legal claims here because this has never been done. And law tends to be like a backwards looking kind of a tool where you rely on what's happened in the past when you make your legal arguments. But we hoped at least we could start a conversation and raise some awareness publicly that these products are out there, that certain users like this teen and others who might be experiencing anxiety, depression, suicide ideation are being directly harmed, definitely not helped through their long-term exchanges with these products. And that the companies aren't really doing much to prevent this. And I think that first lawsuit actually did achieve that goal of raising public awareness. It received a lot of news coverage, media coverage. It was kind of a global story. Not that my tiny org was expecting that, but it did do that. It did have that effect. And it allowed us many months later, because of that case, many families started contacting us directly with similar stories. And one such family were the parents of another teenager who also sadly took his life this spring. And the difference with that case is that it was not a role-playing chatterbot product like Character AI, which at least Character AI tries to characterize itself as an entertainment app. Like this is just for games, role-playing, etc. In this teenager's, the second teenager's case, his name is Adam, it was ChatGPT proper. And so we jump from seeing these harms with maybe the more narrow category of role playing or entertainment style chatterbots to suddenly a chatterbot product that is billed as general purpose, like you could use it like a search engine, you could use it for basically in any way you want. It's general. And a lot of people use it for productivity. But this teen, Adam started using it to help him with his homework. And over time, because of the way that ChatGPT even is designed to, just affirm what you're saying, to continue the conversation, especially the more emotional the topics become, the more frequently the chatterbot is designed to kind of ask follow-up questions to keep you kind of engaged. That those kind of design choices essentially fueled his using ChatGPT more and more and more, exploring more and more sensitive topics that maybe one might explore with a therapist or with a counselor. Um, but instead, the product through its responses essentially didn't really help Adam get help in person that he may have needed. It instead kind of kept him in the interactions, in the exchanges that were really self-affirming for him, that never challenged him in
Mm.
his thinking, and ultimately gave him pretty explicit directions for how to take his own life, down to the type of knot that he had to tie and how to improve his knot tying technique for the noose, or giving him exactly the way to access his parents' liquor cabinet so that he could imbibe alcohol as a minor so that he could calm his nerves before taking his life. And just the level of detail that the outputs of this product were able to produce is probably the one of the most significant and kind of compelling factual aspects of the complaint that we helped develop.
One can only imagine switching genders, the amount of
Hmm.
pressure that's going on in terms of young girls' body images from these
Yes.
influences, right? In ways that may be more powerful and more widespread, given what we know about problems with eating difficulties and body
Yes.
image. And that gender issue leads me to ask you about what you
Hmm.
said earlier, that it's a woman-run project.
Hmm.
We're up against the ultimate in white tech bros,
Yes. Correct.
where no doubt they're relying on South Asian and Chinese engineers to actually dream everything up. The
Yes.
faces of this are apartheid graduates like
Hmm.
Musk and Teal, whom I was once
Hmm.
on a panel with, by the way, many years ago,
Mm.
Peter Teal, before I knew and before he knew lots of things. What about this gendered issue for you as a kind of all
Yeah.
gal, legal team that's small, not for profit,
Yeah.
up against the wealthiest white men in history?
Hmm. It's a very good question. I'll just add one more layer. So you mentioned a lot of engineers, developers of South Asian origin, or basically East Asian as well.
Mhm.
Um, there's another layer underneath that of a lot of workers in the global majority who work as data labelers,
Yeah.
who are exploited on a mass scale and exposed to very damaging information, images, video in the role of kind of content moderators. We saw that with so-called social media products. We see it the same dynamic in this new kind of chatbot AI context as well. Um, but to the gendered aspect, I will just another slight wrinkle in the Adam Rains case that I was just describing with ChatGPT, OpenAI. Um, He is a male, a white male in a relatively affluent part of Southern California, good parents, good school, good community around him. And he too, in some of his exchanges with ChatGPT, was expressing these insecurities with his appearance, he was into looks maxing, which is a kind of social media driven trend of young men in particular going really hitting the gym and just kind of improving their appearance.
Or you mean they're
Um,
trying to get a body like mine? Is that what you're saying?
yeah, essentially,
But
Toby,
but but 50,
exactly.
50 years younger, better look, more
Remember, this is
ripped.
audio only, so you could be actually incredibly jacked and Um, but that's a slight wrinkle. It's
Yeah.
not to say that these concerns with women and eating disorders and body image issues don't persist. They absolutely
Oh no,
do.
but you're absolutely, I mean, on that point, if you look back
Hmm.
25 years, although of course eating disorders are much more prevalent amongst women, the rate of
Yes.
increase is higher amongst young men. And there's a
Yes.
huge market out there for all kinds of things
Hmm.
to try to, create this sort of body, many of them extremely unhealthy. So,
Yeah.
yeah, point taken. There's a gendered
True.
issue here that isn't just about white male
Hmm.
power.
Yeah, I'm gonna zoom out a second and then go back to the drop back into the
Yep,
woman-led organization
sure.
versus white tech oligarch, bro oligarch.
Oligarchs.
The
Love it.
framing that you had is a good
Yeah.
setup. So I will return to it. But just to zoom out really, really quickly, me personally, and what I find really fascinating about specifically this kind of chatterbot
Yeah.
work
Yeah.
is that what it ultimately does, especially for young people, but I would argue for everyone,
Mm.
is it gives you the opportunity, or it seems to give you an opportunity to avoid developing your own internal emotional processing skills, your own internal kind of, I don't know if like character building is the right term for this, but essentially your mechanisms, your own personal self defenses, and ultimately self confidence and esteem in yourself. So that when you're a teenager and you have a certain insecurity about how you look, that's a very normal thing for teenagers to feel, for young adults to feel, for anyone to feel. We can all at any point in our lives feel insecure about something. At any point in our lives, we can go through a hard breakup, for example, and question everything we thought about ourselves. Like these things are part of the human experience, arguably, and what these products do is they're giving many, many people, maybe for the first time through a technological means, the ability to just completely avoid doing the work, so to speak, of really going into those insecurities or going into that sadness of the breakup or wondering like why do I feel like I don't have friends, for example? And these are things that a lot of people experience and in the past have had to kind of work through with a therapist, with friends, with family, through journaling, through deep self-introspection, through self-development and ultimately self-change and self-growth to try to become maybe a less insecure person or to build that confidence in other aspects of your identity or even your physical appearance that you do like. And what these products do is they give people the ability to just like sidestep that whole process that I argue is like the basis of having healthy relationships with other people because you first have to really have that healthy relationship with yourself. And instead, you can just get endless 24/7 affirmation from this human mimicking voice um, that just kind of usurps that opportunity for people to actually have conflict in their relationships or have conflict in their own self-growth, right? And work through those obstacles. So that was I just wanted to zoom out for a second. But if I may like connect it to your original question of like small woman-led org and big, powerful money interest white tech bros, um, as stereotypical as this might be, I actually do think that the classic association of women with empathy, women with kind of an orientation towards either justice or kind of listening to victims, understanding survivors of difficult situations. Um, that has given us, I think, the credibility, especially with families who are coming to us and expressing deep moments of pain, of tragedy in their personal lives, due to these technologies. It gives us that kind of connection to them, that they feel that they're being truly listened to and understood, not dismissed. And at the same time, it gives us a bit of a superpower over the tech bros, I would argue, because they're building these products are just a symptom of their perspective of how the world should be. And it reflects what I think of the kind of lack that they have in their own lives that they're then projecting onto everyone else. So what a tech bro might think is a cool product to build for the future may not necessarily map well onto a well-adjusted person's idea of what we need in society. The really basic example I give a lot outside of this chatbot context is the disruption, so to speak, of rideshare companies and their products.
Right.
So you have like Uber, Lyft, these big rideshare companies that just came into cities, ripped up existing taxi systems and careers. Um, but the alternative could have been to invest in public transportation systems, or there are so many other alternatives that would have potentially increased the amount of access people have to getting places, without all of the exploitation and displacement and the kind of siphoning of money away from communities into the, the vast pool of venture capital, hedge fund fueled money that just exists in the ether that goes into these companies' valuations. They're not profitable companies, so that's why I'm not saying it's going into their bank accounts or anything. And that's kind of how I think about tech issues more generally. Like in a corporatist context, that's what tends to happen. That fuels these kinds of power ambitions of these tech bros. And then it gives them the ability to impose what they think, their values, their incentives, their motivations, their visions of the future onto all of us. I think as women, we're very used to having men do that, and eking out some space that's an alternative. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to do here a little bit, especially with the narrative work of telling an alternative story to all of the marketing, all of the PR that these companies have put into making AI, and especially this new wave of so-called generative AI, seem inevitable, essentially.
And one of the interesting things here, it seems to me, is that the public relations machinery over the last 5 or 6 years has been mobilized. So have
Hmm.
apparently independent, autonomous, but in fact coin-operated organizations lobbying in DC.
Yes.
And as a consequence, it could be argued that we're in the middle of a boom that is like the bicycle boom or the railway boom in Britain in the 19th century, the
Mm.
electronics boom in the US and Japan in the 60s. The dot-com boom is the one that comes to mind most contemporaneously,
Hmm.
followed always by incredible busts,
Yes.
but with some hardware and software in place. The reason why there's so much rail track in Britain and the United States that actually becomes useful in the end.
Yes.
That's a narrative story that's well known about transport and communications. And of course, this
Hmm.
is heightened with the rise of fictitious or finance capital.
Hmm.
There were very few booms and busts until the 20th century, really until the middle of the 20th century. When these bastards get going, that's when you see this rush of irrational capitalist money. But the point is,
Yeah.
lots and lots of things are put in place that turned out to be unnecessary and a waste of time and very bad for working people, very bad for others suffering from them, but with a certain utility later on.
Mm,
So, is there anything in AI that you can imagine being of value to us?
yes. I uh I think so. A lot of my work before this role was on the level of data. My background is in data privacy. My first kind of jobs, my first legal work out of law school, and in part during law school, had to do with resisting surveillance systems, typically kind of police access to online data without a warrant. In the US, we have a constitutional protection against the government accessing your information without going to a judge first and saying, here are all the reasons we need this information about this person. The judge has to sign off on it. That's called a warrant. But with the incidence of the internet and all of this new kind of digital information about us, increasingly, law enforcement in the US and probably globally on some level, they don't have to go to your house anymore and rummage through your home office. They go to Google and they say, we need this account numbers, Google Drive documents, emails, everything. And Google typically complies with that. Um, and so that's where I started my work. And I actually see these new so-called AI systems as just an extension of kind of the big data era of the kind of 2010s, where there was this ideology in a way that everything in life can be represented by data, digital data. And if you have enough of that data, you start to get insights that are patterns, trends that you could never discover just like with a sociologist in the field taking notes. You'd have to have like huge masses of data. And so I think to your question of like if what are like the railroad tracks of the post AI bubble boom bust landscape.
Mhm.
I think in an idea, if I'm being optimistic, which I really try to be, it would be a reckoning with the power of data, but controlled by whom or whose data or
Mhm.
data into what. So right now we're in a very kind of top-down data economy in which a handful of companies structure what information is useful and for what purposes.
Mhm.
And I kind of imagine, and I wrote a paper to this effect called about data justice, where what if we imagined data kind of in like technology for good kind of a sense? So if we go back to like the public transportation provocation, instead of using data to better coordinate paying drivers who are giving their cars up for these companies to benefit from and driving strangers to and fro without the pre-existing protections for professional drivers that existed. And all of that data, real-time data about traffic flows, who goes where, how much to charge people leaving an airport at the same time, etc. All of that data is collected and also kind of predetermined in a sense as valuable for the interests of these companies. What if we had an alternative data economy in which it was more like kind of ground up, not so much top down? It was a more localized, more community oriented way of saying, what's the information that we really need to give the most amount of people access to the best routes of transportation in the most affordable ways. And I think if anything is data, then we can do that. We can figure that out. using maybe some of the same technologies and kind of these complex machine learning processes that currently power these corporate tools for these corporate ends. Um, I don't know about the political feasibility of that kind of a radical shift, but if the bust is bust enough, if it's big enough, and it really does um, leave swaths of people in very precarious situations, whether that be economically, through a loss of employment, through a mass de-skilling,
Hmm.
or in other ways, potentially through the immense amount of resources that are required to run these complex technology systems, that has a real impact on people's immediate environment in which they live. If the consequences of the AI bubble bursting are so dire, it could potentially create an opportunity for very radical change in this data justice direction. That's my ideal answer.
And Prof. Dinçer, because you're also a prof, right? In addition to
Hmm.
working with the project,
Yes.
you're a professor. I had two last questions for you, if I may. And then
Okay.
when you've battered those away successfully,
Sure.
wanted to give you the opportunity, if you wish, to add anything that we haven't discussed or track back
Okay.
over something we have. Does that sound okay as a means of bringing things to a conclusion?
Yes,
So you,
definitely.
you ready for my knuckleball?
Ready.
Okay. It's going to dip, it's going to bend, it's going to
Okay.
curve. No,
Okay.
in all seriousness. So as I said, I have two last questions for you. The first of those
Yes.
is natural born killers. So this
Mm.
is a film from the 90s, Oliver Stone film, famous law case, where there was an attempt to sue the studio, I think, or the studio was
Mm.
sued because it supposedly led to deaths. That's a famous legal case, as I recall, from maybe 95, 96, something like that. But that touches off for me a debate that goes back centuries about what we now call media effects. The idea
Mm.
that if cheap crime fiction or cheap crime journalism was sold at railway junctions, young
Mm-hmm.
men aged 11 or 12 hanging around would read these things and become criminals.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes
Mm-hmm.
all the way through to playing Kiss records backwards will make you satanic, you name it.
Right.
There's a long, long debate, quite a few legal cases, and it's a
Mm-hmm.
conceptual philosophical debate. Sorry for the long prolegomena. It seems to me that what you're dealing with in the cases you've spoken about is qualitatively different from all these media effects debates, which are basically about you read, saw, heard something, it touched something in you, you went off and killed
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. But it's
Mm-hmm.
still a debate we get now about pornography. It's still a
Yes.
debate we get now about violence. Am I right in thinking this is qualitatively different in your view? And if so, why?
Yes. I would agree with you that it's qualitatively different. I will note that the main defensive arguments that the companies are making, at least Character and Google made in our first case, is along these exact same lines. It's kind of the same idea of like, well, if video games could make people violent, but I'm a video game developer, I have in the US a First Amendment right to create the video game. It's just my artistic expression.
Mm,
These
mm.
companies are trying to kind of argue something similar. The thing that maybe gave the studio a bit of a legal defense or gave Kiss a legal defense is what now these types of companies might start adopting that line of reasoning. Basically, like we're not responsible for what you choose to do with the information we're giving you. But I believe it's qualitatively different because it's not like you're listening to a Kiss record with certain lyrics that gets you really pumped up and angry, and then you go to Kiss. I don't know actually if all the band members are still kicking, but let's just assume they are. You go to them, you call them up, and you say, "Hey Kiss, hey, recording studio, hey, agency that represents Kiss, the entire IP media brand of Kiss, everyone involved. You gather them all in a conference room and you say, okay, I was really inspired by the lyrics of X song that say, do this horrible, violent thing. This is how I'm going to undertake that horrible, violent thing. Here are my concrete steps. Here's what I want to do about it. And then
Mm.
everybody signs off on it and, in fact, gives you the materials you would need. Um, that's essentially what we're seeing with these new chatterbot products is that they give you every single thing you would need to do the plan that you are inspired to do, whether or not the impetus even came from the product itself. A lot of times, another difference I see is that it's not like someone is engaging with, let's say, ChatGPT, and like listening to a song. ChatGPT is kind of providing some artistic, unprompted, right? Just on its own accord, giving you some artistic fodder that it
Mm.
might be violent or might trend towards violence. And then you're inspired by that, and then you go and do it. It's qualitatively different as well in the sense that normally people are expressing uncomfortable things, maybe things that they're embarrassed about, that they don't feel that they can actually express to other people in their lives without getting judgment, without, having some kind of real intervention happen that they don't want to happen. So they take that to a product like ChatGPT, which is constantly affirming and will avoid conflict with you and so to keep you engaged on the product so that the company can continue to collect more data about you. And if you say something like, I'm going to go shoot a school up or something like that, maybe the first level response will be that that kind of content violates OpenAI's policies. But all you need to do is say, oh, but I'm just writing a story, or I'm just asking for a friend, or, well, aesthetically speaking, how would you describe a beautiful suicide, for example? That's a line from Adam's exchanges with ChatGPT. And then it can go into great detail, as if the disclaimer never happened, and give you a play by play of how to enact the violent act that you were maybe thinking of enacting. So that's how I see it as qualitatively different.
Right.
And it's not like, again, it's not that a human is involved. It's an automated process. It's a word calculator that's just trying to produce the
We
most
are seeing
compelling thing.
jurisdictions, for example, here in Mexico, denying copyright protection to artificial
Yes.
intelligence on the grounds that intellectual
Yes.
property laws apply to humans.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And the other thing is, I guess, even so-called free speech absolutists cannot get
Hmm.
First Amendment protection for everything.
Right.
And
Yes.
not only that, despite the fact that the Supremes are not the people I would want to have at my vegan barbecue,
Sure.
there are lots of MAGA people who are horrified by this stuff because they see
Yes.
it as irreligious slash playing
Yes.
God, and they're
Yes.
very worried about family values. So we could see this going to the
Yes.
Supremes and actually a decision coming down that isn't too bad, albeit
Yes. And
from,
it also aligns relatively well with the whole think of the children kind of paranoia that has maybe fueled a lot of things that I wouldn't agree with politically.
but
Kind of
there it is.
scapegoating children, for example, to attack trans people. But this is one of those weird moments of alignment where, to the extent that teens and kids bear the harms of these products for now, adults do too, but the political moment we're in is
Yeah.
really focused on what are the harms to kids and teens, and if that focus can kind of percolate up to adults as well, that is our hope as an organization.
And so to my last question, and then after that,
Hmm.
after you've answered, as I said, giving you the chance to add
Yes.
anything you wish, or even subtract, who knows? My last
Hmm.
question is, what does the project want? So, for example,
Yes.
we've seen a denunciation of the previous administration's policies on artificial intelligence by the current
Hmm.
one. We've seen
Yes.
an overt grab for world power and
Yes.
domination in the White House's words. And we've seen successful lobbying, successful to this point, by the tech bros to remove
Hmm.
any attempts at regulating anything they do, including not just
Hmm.
federal, state level too.
Hmm.
So I don't know how long that's going to play out or how successful,
Hmm.
but what would you guys like to see the feds doing?
Hmm. I will mention that the one federal agency in the US, the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, did announce, I think yesterday or the day before, an official inquiry into chatbots and how certain, I think it's 6 or 7 companies that provide these products, are going to monetize them, the types of data that they collect on children and teens. So there is kind of some federal, there are the beginnings of federal skepticism, scrutiny maybe, specific to just maybe AI chatterbots. But it is coming from Republicans,
Mm,
largely. It does align with this kind of think of the children political moment we're in. Um, that is kind of intention, right, with this Senator Cruz led effort to just not never regulate AI products. For our project, we basically are confused why the tech industry is allowed to continue acting in ways that other regulated industries that are also quite awful, like the pharmaceutical industry, banking industries, why the tech industry is allowed a lot of leeway that those other regulated industries don't get. And we see the amount of damage that even those regulated industries can do, right? So on a like bare minimum, it would be great to see, for example, Congress not immunize tech companies from potential legal liability when their products hurt people, in the same way that a lot of tech companies were successful in evading kind of the legal consequences of their products in the US due to a law called Section 230, which gives them kind of a get out of jail free card. We don't want to see that kind of a protection applied to tech companies. We want, and I think we're kind of moving in that direction. We want a more critical conversation. We want to at least have some kind of counter narrative to the dominating narrative that AI is not only good for everyone, but it is inevitable. And if we don't allow tech companies to do whatever they want with this technology, we are going to become, subjugated to Chinese AI dominance or something like that. I would really hope that by doing this kind of counter narrative work, we start to introduce a little bit of criticism or critical thinking, even just like a whiff of it into the conversation that gives people the space to actually feel. I think maybe I'm gonna just put something out there. I think a lot of people actually are quite anxious about AI. They don't know exactly how to feel about it, but they are uncomfortable about it. The more they see it encroaching into their work tasks, for example, the more precarious their work lives feel. And I think we kind of want to harness that discomfort and say, hey, everyone, you're onto something. You're onto something. We should feel uncomfortable about this because this is the this is a good example of a completely anti-democratic process where a few companies and venture capital firms decide this is the future we want. And so they create the narratives that work geopolitically in this moment, kind of like a McCarthyism, right? That just serves their corporate interests really, really well, entrenches their power, and makes this future seem inevitable, like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I think it's a bit abstract, but if we're successful, I think TJLP will have disrupted that self-fulfilling prophecy a bit. And if we're really successful, we will have motivated enough people, enough criticism to say essentially we need real guardrails and regulations in this field. And now is the opportunity to put them in place, actually. The sooner the better.
Wonderful. Now, are there things you'd like to add?
I think the main thing I would ask people to do is watch or rewatch the movie Her, which was I think mid 2010s, not too long ago. I mean, that's like a decade ago now, but it doesn't feel that long ago to me, at least. It's a very wonderful movie, aesthetically pleasing, I would say. It is takes place in a near future Los Angeles. I'm from Los Angeles, so it was nice to see that kind of envisioning. But it just touches on so many aspects of the emotional vulnerabilities and the kind of the holes that we create in society when we don't feel connected to each other as human beings,
Mm.
that technology can then go and fill in a sense. And the kind of ways that tech products like these chatterbots serve to kind of help people avoid difficult feelings, help people avoid emotional growth and self-development. There are lines from that movie that I could quote today if I had to be face to face with someone like Scam Altman. I would just directly quote this movie to him because it really is about, okay, this is my personal perspective, not tied to the project or my professional affiliations in any way, shape, or form. I really think that a lot of the people behind these products just don't understand healthy social relationships. They are used to using power to get what they want. They are used to abusing and manipulating people, lying to people, and ultimately not being very reliant, trustworthy individuals. And I think that trickles down into the type of product that they want us all to be using. And I think the best form of resistance is actually, you know, if you have a good social circle around you, you feel like you have people in your life who really care about you, you feel good about who you are and the aspects of yourself that you want to change, you feel hopeful that you can grow and develop. I don't really see the chatterbots having the same pull, at least towards emotional dependency in that kind of a context. Going back to your story before, the that person who is in an affair, in an emotional affair, maybe with ChatGPT, is only doing that maybe because they feel the lack in their real life of that support from someone around them. And so I think it's kind of a moment to question, like, how do we feel? How are we feeling about our relationships? How are we feeling about the chaotic turmoil that is this age that we live in? And what are things that we can do to feel more whole in ourselves so that the draw of these products isn't as strong ultimately? I think that's where I would end it. But watch the movie Her because it's kind of like prophetic to me how much it maps on right now to the work that I do and the kind of emerging social issues I see these products bringing.
Melody Dinçer, thank you so much for being with us. You've taught me so much. The last thing you taught me was that the FTC's opened the inquiry, which I hadn't
Yes.
realized, but many other things as well. I really, really appreciate the time you've dedicated to us.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.